Up until relatively recent, the 30,000-foot picture when it comes to PBMs specifically has been absent. To my mind, the industry has done a very good job deflecting the conversation to other people. I hesitate to say blame, but certainly they didn't appear in many stories up until perhaps the last 12 to 18 months. So, how PBMs affect access and affordability. When a patient says, my drugs are too expensive, what do they mean? They generally mean that my copay is too expensive or my coinsurance is too expensive. The second issue is, how does this impact specific therapeutic categories? This issue becomes important, especially as new products come online, as we debate and develop and approve biosimilars, and yet somehow prices aren't going down. What does this all mean? Where is the money going? Upwards of 30 to 40% of patients who, as their primary diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis or diabetic neuropathy or fibromyalgia, get as their first-line treatment opioids, when there are non-opioid, FDA-approved label indications, medications on the market. Why aren't they getting prescribed? Why aren't they getting reimbursed? Why aren't they more aggressively tiered? And it isn't about deflecting blame from one group onto PBMs. It's understanding that there are lots of people in the game here, and we need to begin to understand how this ecosystem works so we can try to fix it.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this important forum today to discuss really prescription drug pricing and why prescription drugs cost what they do, and what are some better ways we can figure out how to make prescription drugs more affordable for patients. Part of the tenet of this forum is that we believe that PBMs contribute to the higher costs of drugs, which is exactly the opposite of what they have claimed to do for practically all of their existence. Because I don't know that we're doing a great job with the system that we have on using that 10% of the spend on drugs to affect the 90%. The model we have right now with PBMs as really judge, jury, and executioner, certainly when it comes to pharmacies, and increasingly so when it comes to consumers as well, and increasingly so when it comes to plan sponsors. And what we've seen over the last 30 years since the PBMs have become publicly traded is a 1,000% increase in prescription drug costs. There's got to be a different and better way. And I think that's what we're talking about here today is how do we make that system more efficient, and then how do we make that siloed prescription drug benefit really harmonize with that 90% of healthcare spend. Yeah, the big chains are competitors to us, and we engage in healthy competition, but it's really the PBMs that by far and away are what our members are waking up thinking about and going to sleep thinking about because of the burden and the excessive influence that they have on these small business owners. We've looked at the 10Ks for Express Scripts, and our estimate is that their EBITDA, so this is after they've cleared out a lot of expenses, is about $6.15 per prescription. And I can assure you, when I talk to my members, that they're not making anything like $6 in EBITDA per prescription. I don't think the big chains are as well. Paid 3 to 4 times as much as the provider per prescription, which is $6 represents 3 to 4 times what a pharmacy would be paid in EBITDA. I would contend that seems like a pretty big premium for the administrative part, for the paper shuffling part of this. But we need to let the marketplace decide that. And right now, the marketplace, we believe, does not have the information to make an efficient decision.
Community Oncology Alliance, or COA. We are the only nonprofit organization dedicated solely to community oncology, which is the care setting in which the majority of Americans with cancer are treated. We started COPA because a lot of our practices were starting on-site dispensing pharmacies. It's very clear to us, and echoing what Doug was saying, that PBMs are a huge problem for our members. Not a day goes by that I don't get a half dozen to a dozen emails just about PBMs. It's mind-numbing drowning bureaucracy. It's just jumping through hoops, endless prior authorizations, endless phone calls, faxes, information missing, changed dosages, changed physician instructions, delays, 6 weeks. If you have cancer, you do not want to wait 6 weeks to start receiving treatment. I mean, that could mean the difference between stage 3 and stage 4 cancers. You have a ticking time bomb inside of you, and these PBMs, because of all the barriers they put up to patients getting their drugs, and forcing them to go through the mail order pharmacies, and we have DIR fees that at a minimum we're seeing 3.5%. It's percentage based, which is great when you're talking about pricey cancer drugs. Minimum 3.5%, on more of an average around 11%. So you have practices getting trimester reports from their PBMs 6 to 12 months after the prescription was dispensed that are in the 5 or 6 figures easily on a regular basis. And so all of that money, number one, it's coming out of the system and it's going into the middlemen's pockets where they're not even providing any value or beneficial service in my mind. And then number two, the patients who are Medicare patients who then pay the higher price up front before the discounts are applied retroactively, are pushed into the donut hole, so then they have much higher burdens for cost sharing. Then it goes out of the donut hole, and then we, as the taxpayers, are paying more for that care. If a PBM is forcing this into a mail order pharmacy, right there you're removing them from the point of care. You're relying on often elderly patients to follow very detailed instructions. Take once a day with food, before 6 o'clock. Little things like that become very difficult. So adherence compliance there.
I've worked for various PBMs for the better part of 15 years. So got my career started with Anthem when they owned their own PBM and worked on it from an insurer's side. Worked at Express Scripts very briefly during that wholesale. Saw the contract between Express Scripts and Anthem, and I can tell you exactly why Anthem is suing Express Scripts for a very small amount, in my opinion, of $15 billion. It's actually should be quite more than that. Worked with CVS Caremark as they started acquiring more organizations and bringing specialty in-house. I was at CVS when they introduced the first exclusionary formulary in the marketplace. CVS looked at the landscape and saw that a lot of big brand or blockbuster branded drugs were coming off patent. They decided, well, let's create this formulary, which we call a limited formulary or a narrow formulary, to help control costs. And for anybody that's been around long enough, as these drugs start coming off of market and losing their patent, they become generics. So the market should correct itself. So Lipitor, for example, the PBMs had to do absolutely nothing to control the Lipitor cost. Lipitor typically was about number 2 or number 3 on the top spend for most clients. Well, once it lost patent and became a generic, the usage rate of branded Lipitor went from a number 2 highly utilized drug and obviously a high cost drug to 95% generic utilization. And there was nothing that the PBM did other than move Lipitor from a preferred brand to a non-preferred brand. The market corrected itself because a generic was available. So these exclusion formularies were not really set up to benefit members, if you will. It was to, and that's how they were marketed, and that's how we were told in our sales meetings to market these, but it was really to drive rebates. And if you'll see, probably over the last 5 or 6 years, the average rebate for most clients went from anywhere from $15 to $20 per branded script at retail to now you're seeing upwards of $80 to $90 per branded script at retail. Specialty drugs have, before they weren't even passing the specialty rebates back to clients. They were included in that retail brand. Now you're seeing upwards of $1,000 per specialty drug as a rebate. An interesting number that I heard from a very small PBM received $10 million in rebates just off this one drug that they do not pass back to clients or members. So when you think about the utilization of Humira for a million total members, you're looking at less than 1% of the population is on that. So now you're probably looking at about 1,000 people probably in their entire population that's on that drug. And Welldyne itself is collecting $10 million annually off that drug. That's one drug. The PBMs really aren't set up to help members, and definitely not to help members, and really not to help clients either. Really one of the fallacies behind prior authorization is that it's set up to make sure the right drug gets distributed to the right member. The person you have reviewing it might be a registered pharmacy tech, but typically not. They're charging $35 to $40 to have it reviewed by not a doctor and not a pharmacist. When you look at it, the approval rate on these things are about 90%. If it's a drug that receives a high rebate, it's 100%. When Express Scripts negotiated the contract for, I believe it was Rivapac for hepatitis C, they made a big show in the marketplace about 2 years ago about how they stood toe-to-toe with the manufacturers and said, we're going to lower this cost of this drug. And the hepatitis C drugs at the time were, for a 12-week course of treatment, were about $100,000. And we looked at a lot of the research on hepatitis C, talked to a lot of physicians. The drug does have a 95% cure rate. It's an important drug. It needs to be out there. However, not everybody with hepatitis C needs to take a drug for it. There are instances where the drug can lie dormant. You don't need to be on a $100,000 course of medication. Really, what Sovaldi was supposed to do, and the reason why it came out, was for those patients that were facing a liver transplant or facing life-threatening consequences for the disease, this is a chance for it to cure it without having to go through a transplant surgery, which costs upwards of $1 million over the course of a lifetime. Once Express Scripts played hardball, and I use that with quotation marks, the approval rate for Rivapac went from 30% up to 80%. For that drug. So anytime the drug was coming back through, I could go into step therapy and the value of step therapy. CVS has a step therapy program that is they're preferred, and step therapy should be set up so when you have a high-cost brand drug that has multiple generics within the class, drive the people to the generics that are going to make a difference. They include preferred brands as the first line of treatment. So you can look at when Lipitor came off patent, Crestor was a preferred step. So if a member took Crestor, that would not run up against step therapy. Well, Crestor at the time was probably anywhere from $180 to $200 per script, whereas you had Simvastatin, atorvastatin on the marketplace, Provastatin, all somewhere within $10 to $4. And if the doctor prescribed Crestor, you could take it. Wasn't subject to step. Or if it was subject to step, the Lipitor, if they're prescribed Crestor, that went through. So again, it's all about access and what are we doing to our members at this point? We're putting them through the bureaucracy essentially because it's driving revenue.
How has PBM consolidation exacerbated this problem?
What it's done is it's essentially created a monopoly between the largest PBMs out there. Express Scripts, Optum, and CVS Caremark control about 80% of the marketplace now. What they've found is that some of these smaller PBMs that have very regional focuses, instead of these large corporations going out and saying, you know, we have the right tools, the right formularies, the right products for you as a client, what they do is they buy up. They buy markets and they buy market share. And so what that does is that enables them to go back to pharma. It allows them to go back to the retail pharmacies and create better contracts for themselves. The more volume that they have, the more power that they have.
So my question, Derek, is now that biosimilars are coming on the market, the amount of money that patients are saving is zero.
Right.
So could you explain that?
Yeah, it's all about it's all about rebates. What happens
So
is
so it's accurate to say that biologic A goes off patent?
Correct.
Biosimilar A comes on the market, and yet prices do not go down?
Right, and the reason for that is when you're pricing these biosimilars.
And specifically, I mean prices for the patient.
Correct. Reason for that is when you're looking at the list costs of the medications, the biosimilar companies have access to what that list price is. They do not have access to what the rebated prices are.
That's commercial confidential.
That's commercial confidentiality. And so when the biosimilars are determining their price, it's based off of that list price because they have no other information to go off of at that point. Now, part of it too is that when they try to go to one of the larger PBMs, because the volume is not there in the marketplace for the biosimilar, the PBM is going to limit the access for that drug because the money coming in from a rebate standpoint, the biosimilar doesn't have the access. So they can't give as much in rebates to get it onto the formulary, and therefore it limits the access of the drug. If you're a patient on Humira, first of all, the rebates aren't even passed back to the client until about 180 days after the script is written. So you're a member, you're 6 months into this drug. If you're paying some kind of co-insurance, you're not getting that rebate. Those rebates aren't helping you. It would be like going out, buying a TV. The store says, Target says, you get a $200 rebate for buying this TV, and then Target keeps the rebate, and you still pay the $1,000 for your TV. And Target says, yay, thank you for buying this Magnavox, you just made me $200. I don't think anybody would do that if that were the case. But that's what's happening with drugs. It's the PBM is saying, I've negotiated this, you as a member will continue to take this, and now you've made me $100.
Doug, there have been stories, I can think of two, both in the New York Times over the course of maybe the last 5 years, that have talked about drug prices, and somewhere in the jump of the story, in like the 18th paragraph, it says, Company X, innovator company X, has raised their prices over the course of the life of the patent by X%, and yet they are making less money off of these drugs because of rebates and refunds and all the things that we've been talking about.
I mean, insulin may be the poster child for what you just said as far as the rapid increase, again, this crescendo effect of the cost of the drug. So I was looking at a drug over the weekend, Humalog, and it's gone up. It was introduced in '96, I think, so 20 years, and it's gone up from $20-some to hundreds of dollars now, or well over $100. Lantus is another example where it's gone up several hundred percentage points over a short amount of time, but yet the companies that make it say, time out, I'm not making any additional funds, any additional money. And it's kind of...
Or less, I'm making less money.
Some of them say they're making less. I mean, I think that deserves some price and transparency as well, just quite candidly. But the fact that the PBMs are extracting more and more rebates. In the insulin case, you've got some similar therapeutic agents. And so the PBMs, and someone, on the other side would argue this is what a PBM is supposed to do. They play one manufacturer off the other to get the best price. And if that's how it actually worked, I don't know that we'd even be here today. But it doesn't work that way. What happens is, yes, they extract rebates from the manufacturer, so the manufacturer has to make their shareholders happy as well. So the PBM gets a bigger and bigger rebate. Some of that rebate is passed on back to the manufacturer, mostly because of the increased scrutiny of PBMs, where they are willing to pass on some of the rebate back to the plan sponsor. However, they figured out other ways to pull money from the manufacturer, the pharmacy, and lately the consumer. And I think that's one of the reasons we're here today too, is because the consumer all of a sudden has been drawn into this rebate game. EpiPen's the classic example. A year ago, there's congressional hearings, you have the CEO of Mylan saying, look, we know our list price is $608, but we only make $284. It's the middlemen who are making the difference. Okay, well, middlemen, that can mean a lot of different things. Someone could call pharmacy a middleman. We take some umbrage at that, but they could say, well, pharmacy's in the middle. I asked our members, give me a range of what you make on an EpiPen. $15 to $25 was typical. So that means $284 plus $15 to $25 still leaves about $300 floating around somewhere that consumers are paying. Maybe some of that's making it back to the plan sponsor, but the consumer's on the hook, the pharmacy's not getting rich. Mylan says it's not getting rich, at least as rich as the media is saying it is getting. So where are the dollars going? And the answer is the PBMs. So, it is a real problem. The rebates are going up. Some of it gets passed back, but a lot of it doesn't. I wanted to mention one important point that maybe many in the room know, but if you don't know, it can be a real forehead slapper, and that is that the PBMs have no fiduciary responsibility for their clients. They are not a fiduciary, and they have fought tooth and nail at any hint of becoming a fiduciary.
Take a step back and explain that a little bit more.
So fiduciary would mean that they have the obligation to do what's in the financial interest of their client, their plan sponsor. They do not have that obligation. And again, when it's been suggested that they should have that designation, they have gone apoplectic and brought out all of their big, K Street lobbyists at any hint of being a fiduciary.
If you look at a contract, what is defined as a rebate back to a client? It's typically very specific language that mentions the word manufacturer rebate. So that's not all the money that pharma is passing back to the PBM, but that is what, under the contract, that the PBM contractually has to pass back to the client. There are admin fees in there, but it's not called a rebate. Because it's called an admin fee, PBMs don't have to pass that back. There's disease management fees. Again, for programs to help with the disease, that doesn't have to be passed back to a client. So I think the admin fees alone are somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5% of the drug cost.
Wow.
That is not going back to anybody but the PBM at that point.
It sounds like
When we talk about transparency, we have to be a little bit careful because the PBMs have begun to adopt the word transparent into their lexicon. So they're saying, well, we're transparent. You can see whatever you want, except for that proprietary stuff, which would, that would cause markets not to function efficiently. And we're like, the markets are really not functioning efficiently as it is now, which is why we have so many higher costs. But transparency can be a bit of it can be misused.
Yep, exactly.
If not used carefully.
My name is Madeline Feldman. I'm a rheumatologist in private practice in New Orleans and vice president of the Coalition of State Rheumatology Organizations. I do not have an in-house pharmacy, and most of our American College of Rheumatology members do not. I became interested in PBMs about 3 or 4 years ago when I saw step therapy, non-medical switching, and tried to get to the bottom of it. And basically what I've learned is in the rheumatology specialty medicine sphere, we have rheumatoid arthritis, and Humira is obviously probably the most widely used drug. I learned that the total rebate is equal to the list price times the rebate promised times the market share. And if any one of those three...
So, Derek, does that sound right to you?
Yes.
Okay.
If any one of those three things go up, whoever has the total rebate largest amount, they get to be first tier. If you are not first tier, you do not get used first by the rheumatologist. So you can see where the incentive is. You raise your list price, and it's like a bidding process. Every year, pharmaceutical manufacturers send in their bid. And unlike if you have a contractor, the lowest bid gets it, it's actually the highest bid that gets to be first tier. So you've got 1 or 2 drugs that put in the highest. So if you're new to market and you have no market share, I mean, that's one of the variables.
in other words,
but what happens is my patients pay their co-insurance on the list price. And so do Medicare Part D beneficiaries. They don't pay it on the rebated price.
how much are you as a physician getting paid to
We get
do
paid
prior
nothing.
auth?
We have hired a person and a half to just handle the prior auths every year.
What percent of your office's time is spent on prior auth?
I would say, again, it's a person and a half. So it's a 40-hour work week, so we have 60 hours.
And how big is your staff?
Well, we have 4 physicians, and we have one. I think one person is working a person and
So
a
it's
half.
it's a significant chunk of
It's a
respondents.
significant drain.
If they have a fiduciary responsibility, it helps. It doesn't solve everything, but if they have a fiduciary responsibility and are forced to be what we would call, what our definition of transparent, which again, there's a lot of definitions of transparency, all of a sudden you see their motivation, their conflicts of interest would start to dissipate. I'm not sure how that happens while they're a publicly traded company because their shareholders would have a massive revolt, but I think as a fiduciary, things begin to look a little bit more clear. And
A couple of great ideas I've heard recently is start carving out some of these pieces from PBMs. Carve out the prior authorization process. Hire an independent contractor to do the prior
Carving out-
authorization. It's the analogy of the fox guarding the hen house. You know, you've got the fox is saying, "Oh, I'm gonna guard the hen house and take the hens when I want them." So carve that piece out. Carve the specialty piece out of one of the large PBMs. Go to independent contracting pharmacies. You can build the rebates back into the drug price and pass that through directly at the point of sale. There are some opportunities to do that. What PBMs were set up to do originally was to create more access to pharmacies, being able to control drug prices, and working with big pharma to keep those costs down. The problem now is that the PBMs are almost in control of pharma and how those prices are being controlled.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Brooks from Health HIV. I'm here primarily because my first interaction with the PBM was when United Healthcare's PBM Optum RX and their specialty pharmacy Briova RX decided to increase the prior auth requirements and the mail order requirement for a HIV prevention drug. And so we were thankfully able to get that reversed relatively quickly with some advocacy work. My question for the panelists is, what can we do sort of when things are on a case-by-case basis getting worse over, and then of course when you look in the long term, that there's a progressive trend, if you will. I'm not going to call it intention, but there's a trend of increased barriers to good preventative medicines that can reduce the overall health care cost over the course of a generation.
I firmly believe the best way to do this, and you really have to start going after large plan sponsors, and really getting them on board as well. So you've got some great organizations like the HTA that have come together to really try and figure out a way for their member clients to bring these costs down. Caterpillar, a number of years ago, carved out specialty. They still use Express Scripts for their back-end adjudication, but they completely carved out specialty from Express Scripts, and they actually went out and negotiated with specialty pharmacies and created their own specialty network that they use, and they've actually had negative trend on their specialty over the last 4 or 5 years. Where everybody's seeing a trend of 18 to 20%, they've actually shown negative trend. But again, and I think to Doug's point before, you've got a broker community out there as well that have been kind of snowballed, and they have contracts with PBMs to specifically sell these contracts. Now,
I want to applaud the HIV groups that have done an excellent job of saying, some have said, we don't want our HIV meds to be restricted through the mail, or the latest case where there's been potential HIPAA violations, and they've really made some enormous noise about that. I think that's been a great example of patient groups coming together. One thing that PBMs are loath for is attention. They do not want to be in the spotlight. They want to go under the radar as much as possible. As Derek said, most consumers have no idea what a PBM is, let alone be able to name it. It's they're Fortune 20 companies. And I think the patient groups, HIV groups in particular, have done an awesome job of saying, we're not going to take this.
I'm Bert Zwigenheft. I'm a former CEO of a specialty pharmacy and former president of NASP, National Association of Specialty. Would you say also in the room, a co-conspirator could be, is an opinion, the health plan?
You're absolutely right. From a health plan side of it, rebates are shared with your self-insured, or what they call ASO, administrative only fees, clients. The fully insured clients never see a dime of the rebates. The contracts that were negotiated on a health plan side were from 10, 15 years ago, if they've been with it, and those discounts have not been improved. You've got some clients on a fully insured side that when they carve out from the health plan and may go with a fully transparent PBM without changing the formula, without changing anything. I mean, the plan stays exactly the same, and they can see 32% savings without making one change and just simply going to a fully transparent model. I think what we need to do as consumers and as advocacy groups is really talk with our plan sponsors, talk with our members, and really get in and just dive into those contracts and open those contracts up. I saw a study at a conference about 2 years ago where 80% of plan sponsors hadn't looked at their PBM contract in almost 10 years. But the contracts were set up deliberately to confuse people and to hide things and to get through these loopholes. I mean, you're talking about drugs being dispensed. It shouldn't be a 100-page contract, frankly. It really shouldn't. And find experts that understand these contracts and really dive into it and set it up so that you as the client and you as the patient benefit from it and not these PBMs.
Community pharmacy on PBMs we've been out there screaming at the top of our lungs for a long time. We need more voices. So CMS, certainly, the Hill, they're familiar. When we walk into an office, they know what we're going to talk about. We need voices from other sources. We need other people to also be concerned about the role that PBMs play. And we say that they are contributing to the higher cost of drugs. And if you believe that, you need to add your voice to that message. Disrupting the current prescription drug business model, which relies on PBMs, is a means to an end. The end is really our healthcare system and making that a better place and taking that 10% to be synergistic with the 90%. Short-term, tactically, fiduciaries, we have DIR legislation that's been introduced that could be helpful in the short term, but crescendoing, adding your voice, having the decision makers, the plan sponsors, the media hear it from others in addition to community pharmacy, but hearing it from your organizations is how we'll eventually solve this and have a better pathway forward for consumers and for our healthcare system.
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you. My quick takeaways in shorthand: crescendo effect, optics. Somebody needs to turn ProPublica onto this one. Having things. Well, you failed. So we need to pick up. We need to pick that up, and it's just shocking, even just from an anecdotal perspective. Pricing things into the system is a user-friendly way of explaining a lot of what we talked about, the impact of consolidation or deconsolidation, as the case may be. Forensic accounting, to Nancy's point of view, especially from a plan sponsor. Where are the plan sponsors relative to doing their own fiduciary forensic accounting? And then lastly, of course, sunshine is the best disinfectant, and I think we've sprayed quite a bit of it out there this morning. So thank you, panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.